Hello again, folks. We're looking at Edge Magazine issue 8, which is May 1994, and for some reason my iPad stopped recording halfway through last video, so we're continuing with The Lost Eden. And I like how they say, I don't think CD-ROM will be big with action fans yet, not until real-time rendering is possible. And they are totally right. Resident Evil didn't have real-time rendering, and it played pretty crap. Crash Bandicoot and Mario 64, they had real-time rendering, and they played okay. And so did Zelda 64. But mostly the shooting games did pretty well, like Unreal and Quake. Okay, so on to Top Hunter. I don't know this game, it's for the Neo Geo, and apparently it only has 4 levels, and it's somewhat like Bionic Commandos with an S. Well, doesn't seem interesting to me. Another weird commercial coming from Bravo. So here's a full-on article in the CD32. Most of the readers of Edge at the time were still British. They grew up on a Commodore 64, if not a ZX Spectrum. And the CD32 was supposed to replace the Commodore 64, but it didn't. It was basically a Amiga computer with a CD-ROM attached to play games. It was a bit cheaper, had a pretty good controller, and but the problem is, I don't think there are any games made for the Amiga CD32 that were not released on the Amiga computers. So what you got were slight improvements, mostly to do with extra video and sometimes somewhat improved graphics, but that wasn't worth it. A lot of the better Amiga games were ported to PC. And yeah, here's talk about we don't develop any CD32 specific developments. We don't develop for a format until there is a very significant user base. So very few people got a CD32 because there were little unique games, and there weren't many unique games because not many people had a CD32. And yeah, there's talk about how it can be used as a home computer, but who would do that, right? Who would use something like this as a computer, especially in the mid-90s when Windows was becoming the standard. Here are screenshots and descriptions of, well, a bunch of MediaCore games for the Amiga CD32. They say the best one is Pinball Fantasies, which was brilliantly translated to the PC, and I remember having a 386 at 25 megahertz, and it did wonderfully on that. So no need for a CD32. We have to hurry up a little bit. So we have Namco, an article about their past and their future. So there's the current arcade games, and we see your Pole Position and other racing games they made. Let's talk about how big they were in the early 80s with games like Rally X and Pole Position, Dig Dug, and of course Pac-Man. So a lot of classics came from Namco. I feel like I missed one. What do they have here? So for the Famicom, they released games. Oh yeah, Galaga, of course. Galaxy and Galaga, huge games in the early 80s. But Namco didn't like how Nintendo was making most of the money off of Namco's games for the Famicom, so they got into a dispute. And since then, from around 1985 until 1995, Namco was mostly preoccupied with arcade games. Like this one, Cyber Sled, which was pretty good. The rest, you don't have to remember them. And here they have all the games made by Namco. Well, it's hard to get it sharp. I'm sorry, folks. Oh. And yet another commercial for manga. 8th issue in a row. So now on to the reviews. And we have John Madden Football for the 3DO, which was a good game. Did it play better than Tecmo Super Bowl? No, it didn't. It played more or less the same as the Genesis version of John Madden, which was good enough. And Edge rewarded it with a 9. Yes, it looked very pretty. And looked just as good as any football game on the PlayStation. A lot of commercials this one. So Subterranea, Edge loves it and gives it a 9. I would have given it a 7 or an 8. It's a very good shooting game. I like it how you can travel multiple directions. I didn't like the floaty controls that much, but still, it's a good challenge. And I think it's funny how Edge talks about the Mega Drive not having that many good shooting games, even acknowledging Thunder Force. But I'm like, come on. I mean, the Mega Drive has a lot of excellent shooting games. I mean, just Truxton alone, right? No, not just Truxton, but what's the game with the snappy soundtrack? Well, there's Space Mega Force 2 and Alesti. And I don't know. I'm not that I'm not that big into the genre, but every time I see one of the better Mega Drive shooters, I'm impressed. Ultimate Tiger is released for the Towns Marty, and it gets an 8, but to me it looks rather generic, and I'm never going to play anything on a Towns Marty anytime soon. Now, on to classics. Tempest 2000. I hope you've heard of this game, because this is one of the most significant games ever made, considering the history of games as an art form. It's basically Tempest, but totally rad. It's made by Jeff Minter, who has made a lot of different versions of Tempest, and all his games have techno and references to llamas and funny sounds, but it's all about getting into the trance, getting into the state of mind of playing an arcade game, and Tempest 2000 does that splendidly. It might just be the coolest game ever made. Fantastic soundtrack, the visuals are amazing, and the gameplay is simply doing what games are good at, moving things around and shooting them. So the game gets a 9. I think that's just perfect. It's not for everybody, but an important game, and I'm glad Edge acknowledges it. It's for the Jaguar, by the way. Easily the best game for the Jaguar. So there's Virtual Racing for the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis, which was expensive, $200, 70 pounds. And you got a game that was 80 to 90% the same as the arcade game. It had pretty good frame rate, and Edge gives it an 8. But remember, you only had one car and 3 tracks. So, but people are still playing Daytona, right? Not playing Virtual Racing, though. It's not that good. Here's an advertisement for the Multi-Mega, which is a CD32. Excuse me, a Sega CD and a Genesis in one, and it was, well, about this big. This is a CD, and there's an extension. Hey, Spin Master, another Neo Geo platformer, and this game only gets a 4 because it's way too short. And other than that, it's not that very impressive. So Spin Master might be a cheap game for the Neo Geo. Don't think it's worth looking into. Okay, we have Strider, the arcade game. Very well translated to the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis. Don't forget the Nintendo version, which is also very good. It's way different. It's more like a role-playing game, but it plays excellently. One of the better games for the Nintendo 8-bit, and that's saying a lot, of course. So on the charts, we have, well, the arcade is dominated by Ridge Racer, Street Fighter, Virtual Fighter. What about the Mega CD? We always look at that, right? Sonic CD. Where's Night Trap? Is it falling off the chart? Oh my! Oh, it's at 10th place. There it is at the bottom. So one more month of Night Trap probably. Super Nintendo has Super Mario Kart at the top. That's a year old by now. So Super Nintendo needs some new games. But there's tournament fighters for the Super Nintendo. That was a very good fighting game. What's the most wanted game according to Edge readers? Well, Ridge Racer, Magic Carpet. I don't know this game. Aliens vs Predator, and we saw this last time. What was it called again? Guardian. And this game's called Orion Off-Road. Japan is looking forward to Final Fantasy VI. That would be perhaps the best role-playing game of all time. And Japan also wanted Fire Emblem. Yes. Also Dragon Quest VI was coming out. Okay, let's move on. I don't know what's wrong with my iPad. I can't get the visuals sharp. It's giving a red message all the time, even though I've made enough room. So I don't know what's going on. Now we're almost done. We have an interview with Bob Faber, or Faber, and he's the spokesperson for 3DO, I believe in Europe, and he has a lot to say on these subjects. There's a lot of optimism by the 3DO. There's some talk about downloading games. That was the first time I've ever heard about that in a video, in a magazine. There's talk about not focusing on video, but sticking to games, even though the 3DO wanted to be an multi-user device. So what do you want? You want music? Well, you already had a CD player, and you had games. What else could you do with CD? Watch, like, look at pictures. So yeah, 3DO was for the games. You have to be honest about that. And maybe that was also part of his demise, because it kept saying, nah, you know, we're a multimedia machine, but no, we're only about games. Okay, the question answers a lot of technical stuff, nothing really worth getting into. And we have finished Edge Magazine number 8. Number 9 will be about AM2, the makers of some of the best Sega games. So that'll be next month. More Edge here. And the traditional black back of Edge Magazine. So that was issue number 8. We're way into 1994 now. And I'll see you next time in June.